Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our briefing today, Shifting Gears, Policies for a More Sustainable Highway System. I'm Dan Brissett. I'm the president of the Environmental and Energy Study Institute. EESI was founded by a bipartisan group of members of Congress, and since 1984, we have worked to provide information about environmental, energy, and climate change topics to policymakers and the public. Sometimes our briefings are online on Capitol Hill, sometimes they're online like this. They're always informative, they're always science-based, they're always nonpartisan. We do our best to bring resources to congressional staff and to our other audiences on a timely basis in a way that's relevant to your daily work. We do a lot of briefings every year. We also do a lot of other resources, and the best way to keep up with everything is to subscribe to our bi-weekly newsletter, which is Climate Change Solutions. And you can do that as well as access materials and videos from all of our past briefings by visiting us at www.eesi.org. We put a lot of thought into making sure our resources are always science-based, like I said, and ready when congressional staff need the information. And to that end, we just launched our latest resource, a semi-regular 30-ish minute rapid readout briefing series. Last Friday, we were joined by Molly Reynolds with Brookings to take stock of where things stand with budget reconciliation. Rapid readouts will come together quickly, so subscribing to Climate Change Solutions and following us on Blue Sky, Instagram, and LinkedIn will make sure you never miss a thing. But if you do, no problem. Just visit us online and check it out, watch the posted video, and read the key takeaways. We don't have another rapid readout for a little while, but there will be more rapid readouts in the works for sure. Highways are the dominant transportation infrastructure in the United States. Since the end of World War II, roads, and more roads have been scraped into the landscape and paved to connect towns and cities. But highways divide us as much as they help bring us together. Multi-lane roads have bisected communities, made it hard to get around without personal vehicles, and even prevented wildlife from migrating or moving around within their habitats. And all of this comes at a very high price tag that only seems to get bigger. In the current fiscal year alone, $62 billion is allocated to the Federal Highway Administration for road maintenance, repair, and expansion. And yet, as we've discussed in previous briefings focused on upcoming surface transportation reauthorization debates, aren't we still sitting in traffic a lot more than we used to be? Are we really getting around any faster with less stress and a reasonable expectation of safety? Highways are a part of life, but there are probably ways we can make better policy decisions about them. What can we do to improve our transportation system, highways as well as rail, transit, and other mobility options, so that we're able to move around faster, easier, safer, and cheaper? That is what our panelists are going to join us in just a moment to help talk about. We have a survey link here on the screen right now. If you have a moment to take our survey, we really appreciate it. We read every response. If you have any questions or comments about our programming today, please let us know. We'll put this up at the end of the briefing as well. It only takes 2 minutes, but we really appreciate everyone's willingness to respond. We have 4 amazing panelists. We also will have time for questions. And so if you have a question, I always have questions, but if you have questions in our online audience, you can ask them, and you can send us an email, and the email address to use is ask, that's ASK, at eesi.org. We will also be doing real-time coverage on Blue Sky and our Instagram story. You can follow us on social media at EESI online. So lots of different ways to send us in questions if you like, and we'll do our best to get to them and incorporate them into our discussion. So that brings us to the first of our 4 speakers today. MJ Carpio is the executive director of Move Minnesota. Before taking on this role, she worked for the organization as its political director and campaign manager to secure dedicated funding for public transit and champion Minnesota's nation-leading climate law. MJ's work today is informed by a breadth of past experiences, from working as a policy aide at the Minneapolis City Council to organizing candidate and issue campaigns, conducting research at a neuroscience lab, working in restaurants. MJ is a lifelong public transit rider, me too, and sees the expansion and reimagining of multimodal transportation systems as integral to improving our everyday lives, connecting communities, and adapting to climate change. MJ, it's a real thrill to have you on our briefing today. I'm looking forward to your presentation. I'll turn it over to you.
Good morning, everyone. As was introduced, my name is MJ Carpio, Executive Director of Move Minnesota and Move Minnesota Action. Next slide, please. So I'll briefly go over who we are. We have a nonprofit C3, and we also have a C4 that's a part of our leg of our organization. And I will be focusing on the regional transportation sales and use tax, specifically the active transportation component of it. And then next, I will talk about our transportation greenhouse gas emissions impact assessment law that we passed in 23 and improved in 24. We're calling it driving down emissions here at Move Minnesota. And then I'll also touch on redefining highway purposes and shifting funding for future forward work. Next slide, please. So Move Minnesota leads the movement here in the state for an equitable and sustainable transportation system that puts people first. And their vision is to create a Minnesota where our transportation system breaks down barriers, protects our climate and environment, and creates access and choice. And so we connect people to transit where the system works well, and we also fight hard to ensure that it works for everyone where it doesn't yet work well. And so we're very passionate about connecting communities, combating the climate crisis, and expanding access to jobs and resources, and just overall improving daily lives for Minnesotans of all ages, races, incomes, and abilities. Next slide, please. We also have a Move Minnesota action leg. This was launched in 2021. So this is for effective organizing, issue education, and electoral advocacy. Next slide, please. So in 2023, as Dan introduced, this was a big year for Minnesota. Next slide, please. And we were able to win long-term dedicated transit funding to improve transit across the Twin Cities metro. And so this is through the implementation of a 75-cent metro area sales tax, and that will allow us to have $500 million for public transit every year, roughly, and with 24 million of those roughly gained for active transportation per year. Next slide, please. And so previously our metro transit system was running on a budget deficit, but with the new resources, we're able to sustain current operations and maintenance, but also expand the system with 5 to 10 minute bus frequency, complete bus rapid transit network, an electrified bus fleet, and just better suburban service, free or reduced fares, and a well-resourced operations and maintenance to keep whatever we have now and whatever we'll expand to able to run smoothly. And these investments will provide major improvements for existing transit riders too. So just as an example, our previous analysis showed that, simple improvements in traffic light signal priority and bus lane striping on the Twin Cities core could result in a time savings of 781,000 hours per year across all the rides and riders, which if you do your quick arithmetic, that's 89 years worth of time savings every year. And so that's more time that you could be spending with friends and family and all the fun stuff. Next slide, please. So I'll highlight the active transportation component of the metro area sales tax. These are, when we say active transportation, these are resources for walking, biking, and rolling, and overall creating a safer, more integrated transportation system overall. So the roughly 20 million that I had mentioned earlier, that's regional funding. It will be leveraged with federal support as well. So that brings the total investment in active transportation to roughly 70 million. And this would result in a total regional investment of over 100 million in active transportation just in 2024. And just to give you examples of the people who have applied. So these are county and city planners that have applied to fix sidewalks, replace pedestrian ramps, create ADA compliant multi-use trails, and add or modify the push buttons for pedestrian signals and other improvements. And some of the safety risks that we're addressing here are crowding of non-motorized users on the sidewalk or mixing of bicyclists and vehicles within the roadway. And it really addresses the need for quality multimodal, again, multimodal meaning not just driving, but also transit, biking, walking, and rolling, and to support the current and future development along the target corridors and create user safety and comfort challenges that's been named quite a bit, and the lack of connectivity with the larger transportation networks. Next slide, please. So on to our other wins in 2023 is our nation-leading climate policy. Next slide, please. So this is, again, what we're calling driving down emissions. And in statute, it's officially Transportation Greenhouse Gas Emissions Impact Assessment. And at a high level, this is about curbing highway expansion and connecting urban planning to climate goals. Next slide, please. So we have both the statewide multimodal transportation plan here in Minnesota and another statewide greenhouse gas emissions reduction goal to build off of. This is in statute. And the goal for those is to, from the SMTP, we have a goal of reducing per capita vehicle miles traveled by 20% by 2050. And then our statute, our greenhouse gas reduction goal in statute says that we have to get to net zero by 2050. Next slide, please. So we did, there was a community engagement component of the SMTP, which found that 60% of Minnesotans support some type of vehicle miles traveled reduction target. So this is well supported in the state as well. Next slide, please. And we took a lot of inspiration from Colorado. At the time that we were working on these bills, Colorado became the first and only state in the nation to pass a law that integrated climate impacts in the planning equation for any highway expansion project. And so we consulted with experts in Colorado, including colleagues at RMI, to craft a measure that leveraged our state targets and their innovative concept and create a new model for the nation, basically. Next slide, please. So at a high level, this requires the Minnesota Department of Transportation to assess the climate and VMT impacts of any new highway expansion projects and ensure that it decreases both greenhouse gas emissions and vehicle miles traveled. Next slide, please. The Minnesota context is that we have 12,000 miles of major highways, and although they only take up 8% of the state's roads by mileage, nearly 6 of every 10 miles Minnesotans drive are on these highways, so a full 58% of the vehicle miles traveled every year. And so making significant changes to the way highway projects happen pays massive dividends towards reducing climate pollution and helping Minnesotans shift to more sustainable ways of getting around. Next slide, please. So the 2023 driving down emissions took the state climate benchmarks that I previously mentioned and created a clear process to put them into action for a certain set of urban planning and transportation projects. And then from 23 to 24, we joined a group of experts and stakeholders, the Greenhouse Gas Emissions Mitigation Working Group, to discuss key aspects of this legislation. And we were basically able to emphasize a few things, which I will highlight in a little bit. But basically, so we were able to improve the 2023 law across 2024. And they look similar, but basically in the past, if the project does not reduce VMT and GHG, you didn't have to take action. But the key difference with the 2024 law is that it actually has to reduce VMT and GHG, and if it doesn't, you have to mitigate it. That's a big win. Next slide, please. And so, yeah, as I mentioned, we joined this working group, and they were able to identify that they were able to emphasize that assessing the impact of a single project will have on vehicle miles traveled is challenging with existing models, and assessing multiple projects together would allow for more accurate analyses, and that the local and regional governance bodies will need technical assistance, and a technical advisory committee would have to provide accountability and appropriate flexibility as the law is implemented. So right now, this technical advisory committee, the TAC, is meeting to further provide accountability and just make sure that this is working out well as the law was intended to do. Next slide, please. So an example of where this law could apply is this well-known Rethinking I-94 project in the Twin Cities. This is a reconstruction project between downtown St. Paul and downtown Minneapolis. It's a long-term effort to engage communities that live and work and commute along the corridor and promote effective movement of those people. Additionally, just as an added context, MnDOT, our Department of Transportation, actually recognized that the action 60 years ago of constructing the highway actually devastated communities, and those impacts are still felt today. So that's what we're trying to alleviate. So in the 2023 version, it would have only applied to individual capacity expansion projects on the trunk highway system. And so for the I-94 alternatives presented to the public, only the expanded freeway alternative would be subject to the 2023 law, because all the other options maintain, redesign, or in some cases, shrink I-94's car capacity. And so if MnDOT were to pursue the expanded freeway alternative, we can safely assume that the project would increase and not decrease driving and pollution. And although it's not yet an exact science, we can definitely make educated guesses and to say that that would expand the trips and the vehicle miles traveled. So then if MnDOT, with the 2024 law, if MnDOT were to pursue that option, they would also have to fund the mitigation projects like biking, walking, and transit investments. And to meet the law's requirements, MnDOT would have had to add enough projects that decrease driving and emissions. So like funding a bus rapid transit route or many miles of protected bike infrastructure to offset the impacts of the highway and make the package of projects consistent with our 2050 climate and driving targets. So just as an example, what would it look like to offset 40,000 car trips per day, which is what we know is happening or would happen with some of the proposals on Rethinking I-94. We know that pre-pandemic, our Metro Green Line here, that it carried 44,000 trips each year. And so that would, offsetting an I-94 expansion might require an offset of the scale of a new urban train line. So that's pretty exciting. Next slide, please. So an exciting opportunity for us in the future is that the new law, the 2024 improvement, also allows MnDOT to collect greenhouse gas and vehicle miles traveled data from cities and counties across the state. We will know a little bit more maybe towards the end of the year or in maybe next year how we could use that, and that will basically enable Minnesota to expand this law to all roads in the state and in the future. Next slide, please. And so I mentioned before that we did this in partnership with RMI, and they basically found that this could save us 91 billion in cumulative savings by 2050 just from reduced driving. And additionally, this will result in 3.8 billion fewer miles driven every year in the metro area, and then reduce climate pollution by 412 metric tons per year. So pretty awesome stuff. Next slide, please. This is just some additional information about the greenhouse gas and vehicle miles traveled reduction law. If you're interested, we could talk more about it later as well. Next slide, please. So this mentions a bunch of other work that we have been doing in the past couple of years, but just to highlight that the positive loop that will result in, we want fewer car trips, and if we are increasing investments in transit, then people will be able to take that and replace those car trips. All right, next slide, please. So moving forward, something that we're going to be working on with coalition partners is redefining highway purposes and shifting the funding. I mentioned before that we did statewide polling, and in that same poll, we also found that 66% of the responders would support a bill to improve transportation options in Minnesota using funding from the state and federal government, which would otherwise go to highway expansion. So that's pretty huge. There's a huge appetite here to want to start shifting their modes of transportation, but also just because of our history here and history in other states as well, people have a real appetite for how we relate to highway and specifically highway expansion. And so one of the things that we'll be working on is to statutorily define highway purposes as inclusive of transit, biking, walking, and rolling. And another tactic that we could be doing is shifting state funding so that we could split the motor vehicle sales tax evenly between transit and highway projects. And so overall, to fully realize the potential of our new driving down emissions law, MnDOT will need to both curtail investments in polluting highway projects and increase investments in transit, biking, walking. And thankfully, federal transportation funding, which is allocated through the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, or IIJA, that provides highway funding flexibility. So states can redirect highway funds to sustainable multimodal projects. And this means that, as Minnesota is reducing investments in harmful highway projects, it can simultaneously increase available funding for climate positive investments. So Minnesota's laws are a little bit different right now. The state's transportation financing laws require more than $2 billion of annual transportation revenue to be spent only on highways. And so without this flexibility in how the money can be spent, our own Department of Transportation will have a hard time finding adequate funding for mitigation projects. And then, ironically, if MnDOT cannot secure money for mitigation projects, then they can't build the underlying highway project to begin with. So, next slide, please. Oh, yeah, never mind. That's what I got for you. Yeah.
Thanks. MJ, you had lots of great stuff in your slides. Just a reminder that presentation materials for all of our panelists today are available at www.eesi.org. If you wanted to go back and rewatch any of MJ's presentations or any of the presentations of our upcoming speakers, you can also do that by visiting us on our website. And that brings us to panelist number 2. Dave Gula has worked for the Wilmington Area Planning Council in Delaware since 2005. Dave focuses on community planning studies as well as transit and multimodal planning projects. Some of his current projects look to improve multimodal safety on highways and to develop bike and pedestrian underpasses for busy roads. Dave has worked on rail station studies in Maryland and Delaware and continues working to complete the connection between SEPTA and MARC train services. He manages a number of Wilmington-based projects that focus on building collaborative public efforts to help redesign transportation in the city. Dave, thank you so much for joining us today. I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks very much, Dan. Appreciate being invited here to EESI to give this presentation. Today, I want to talk about one of our big projects from a few years back, Bridging I-95, Connecting the Community. This is a CAP feasibility study within the city of Wilmington. Looked at about 6 blocks of neighborhood that basically borders the canyon that is I-95 through that stretch of Wilmington. In some cases, in some of the spots, I-95 goes over the neighborhoods. In this particular spot, it becomes just a really big canyon between neighborhoods. And so one of the challenges those folks have is just dealing with I-95 on a daily basis. And so basically, this project was looking at how do we kind of try to mitigate some of the everyday challenges that I-95 brings. Troy, can I have next slide, please? So I think one thing to know is I-95 just recently went and completed a massive rehabilitation project through Wilmington. This was between 2021 and 2023. And as DelDOT kind of geared up, and the Delaware DOT geared up the public outreach for that early in 2018, one of the challenges became that folks in the neighborhoods were asking, well, are we going to be able to change anything in I-95? Do we have to have the same layout that we have now? Can we get sound barriers? Can we have better lighting on the bridges over I-95? And so during the 3 meetings that the DOT had with the community over that period, it kind of came out that maybe there was something else that would need to be considered. Unfortunately, you've already got your bridge plans and your rehab plans already mostly fully developed at that point. So we were asked by the Secretary of Transportation, WILMAPCO, asked us to please take a look at working with the community and seeing if there are some ways to potentially mitigate what's going on with I-95 within Wilmington. And I-95 was built back in the 60s. It took out a neighborhood that was fairly well established. So we went back to the community initially just asking questions. The idea was perhaps we can do something to mitigate, perhaps there's a cap structure that could be developed. So when we sat down with the community, one of the first things we did was just figure out what is it they're looking for? How do they want to improve neighborhood character? What kind of pride do they have? We know there's a grassroots group here that's very active. They have actually painted murals on the 5 bridges that go over I-95 in that stretch. They've all got murals that were painted as a community project in conjunction with the city of Wilmington and with the Delaware DOT. So that's one of the core groups we met with. And really what we got from them was that they want to provide, probably a little bit more equitable, safe, and connected access to pedestrians. As I said, there are bridges over I-95. Those bridges are not they're not the widest. The sidewalks are narrow and the lighting is pretty poor. As part of our project, we wanted to create a very welcoming and inclusive environment for those people to get together with us and talk about how to improve on the things that they've done and potentially what could be done here. So there were some challenges. There were some things that we were not going to be able to affect. I-95 was going to continue as it is now, and we were not going to be reconfiguring it as part of this project. We would not be looking at commercial or residential relocations as part of the project. So we want to kind of leave those things alone. We need to maintain an acceptable traffic flow. There are ramps to I-95 through this stretch. We still have to move vehicles, but we need to be more conscientious of how we do it in the pedestrian environment. And as I said, we are not going to be able to make any changes to those ramps or any of the infrastructure that was currently being rehabbed at the time. So those are some of the constraints that we did have. Can I have the next slide, please? So for us, we started with an advisory committee that included the community leadership, civic organizations, churches, agency partners that we work with on a regular basis anyway, and the elected officials at the local, state, and national level. We did have 2 virtual meetings through this process, and we had 3 in-person meetings for this advisory committee. But all the meetings were held in the advisory committee in churches alongside the corridor, in a school that's right on the corridor, even around the corner. And some of these pictures that you see here, these are the groups actually doing the mural painting that we sat in on those events as well. They seem to have one almost every year for the last 5 years. And so we got to sit in and basically I helped paint a wall one day. I'm not very good at it, but nobody was complaining. As far as our community outreach, we did have to have 1 virtual workshop. We were just coming out of COVID at that point, but then we were able to hold 4 in-person workshops. And again, they were all held within the project area. So it's very important to us. We know this is a semi-tech desert. There are areas where people don't have the ability to sit in and log in on computers. So we held these workshops, again, in schools, churches, right around the corridor. We did some presentations at some of the groups that also meet regularly in the area. I am very familiar now with United Neighbors and West Center City Civic Group, met with the Hedgeville Neighborhood Group, Westminster Presbyterian Church, and the Wilmington Rotary Club. We met with as many people as would talk to us because this is such a big potential project for the city, for the state. And it was really important for us to attend as many community events as we could. So as I said, we attended the bridge paintings, but we also attended community meetings at one of the local community centers that's right around the corner from that as well. Can I have the next slide, Troy? And the process really does start with the public. In this particular case, we did not have a partners group that was meeting to steer the community. We were meeting, the advisory committee was the group for us. And so we met with them at the beginning of the process and throughout the process. First started with a vision. What do they really want to see? And really it was, we need a place for everyone. We need a place that's safe and walkable. We'd like to have some color here. There's not a lot of greenery around this, where the I-95 Canyon as it is now. So parks are important, but it has to be well lit, well maintained, and they have been programmed. They didn't want just to have a big field, a big open field that whatever happens in. So we need to, as we move forward, think about how to manage the space, provide those community areas, and then have someone that's sort of in control of those things. So you need regular cleaning. You need to make sure the area is well lit. And that was some of the biggest questions we were asked at the very beginning of this process. Who's going to be in charge of this when it is built? Because we don't want to have a big dark park, every night where we don't know what's going on in there. And we also want to have the ability to have community groups get in there and do things sort of on a regular basis so that people know this is a program park and becomes a really good center for the community. Next slide, please. So having met with those groups, we were given a whole list of things that they wanted. You can see some of them here, a lot more greenery cover and some community, for maybe a small community performance area. I had one gentleman who wanted to have a full out regional concert hall, which we didn't think was the most suitable in the middle of a neighborhood, basically not exactly the best place to have it. We're looking at as much pedestrian and bike infrastructure as we can. Pollinator gardens, all kinds of flexible use lawns and a playground, some public art areas. We worked with the Delaware Art Museum to talk about how we could potentially do sculpture gardens or things like that here. As we said, we already had that local art in the murals that are on those bridges. Some of those bridges will be potentially removed if this cap goes through. So the idea is, how do we preserve that artwork or recreate it somewhere else? The things we didn't hear about were people didn't want to see new residential in here. The concern would be that it would go in at another level, and it would then become very unaffordable for the folks who do live there now. So that's a huge challenge. We can't build a cap and put parking on it. So that's another challenge. If this is going to be a park, it needs to have some parking around it, but it also has to be a community park, not a regional park that would have a huge influx of people all the time. We do have great bus service right through this area, and so we want to maintain that bus service as part of this process. But traffic calming along the streets that would border the cap on Jackson Street and Adams Street and on the bridges is another big challenge. You want to have it very, very pedestrian friendly, and that area is not, because you have wide lanes, ramps, and high traffic. So we've got to find ways to work around that as well as part of this project. Next slide, please. So this is just a quick example of what we called phase one. This is the area between 6th Street and 8th Street. You can see 7th Street in the middle there would be closed to vehicular travel. And we try to fit as many of the things that the community was looking for in this space, because this is as we go forward, this is an expensive project. We don't want to have, it is sort of an incomplete park where we only got some of the things in there. So you've got a lot of walking trails. You've got a big open field that actually would be a really nice viewing for downtown, to see the downtown skyline, especially when it's lit at night. You've got a small amphitheater with restrooms in the area, but then you've also got nature play and a climbing wall, things that kids want to use. One of the hopefully successive phases was going to have a sort of a water feature, like splash fountains. We could move that here right on the top of this image you see along Jackson Street if we don't know that we're going to get the rest of the park built. But the idea was to fit as many of the amenities in here as we could for folks who basically gave us really good background and feedback on what they wanted to see. Next slide, please. So going forward, the design of it is important. We did work with a firm that had done these kind of caps in other major cities around the country. And so some things we learned was if we structure it properly, we could have larger trees. So it's not just all small trees or bushes. You really have nice shady pathways, places to sit, places to eat when you're having a picnic with your family. So really great work on our consultant team, Hargreaves and Jones and JMT, to help us to develop not just what should be on here, but how we're going to build it and make it work. Next slide, please. Another key piece of this is these streets that are going to border the cap area, Jackson Street and Adams. They have ramp systems. We know they're going to have some traffic, but we really wanted to see some traffic coming along here. And I think most of what we want to see are raised intersections at these spaces that will be the streets that will be remaining should this project go fully forward. 6th Street, 8th Street, 10th Street. We'd like to see raised intersections to help slow traffic through here, and maybe even some lane narrowing. We are going to see narrower lanes starting on Jackson Street in 2005. End of this summer, that street's being restriped. It'll go from 2 lanes of through traffic to 1 lane of through traffic. Looking forward to that. And that same part of that project, we'll see 7th Street closed to vehicular traffic as a pilot project to see if we can still maintain traffic flow through the area. And that'll be returned to the community as a community space. They've already used that at times for nighttime movie showing. So it's already somewhere where they're used to being, and it works really well. For Adams Street, there's a lot more challenge with the traffic calming because there's so many ramps that empty onto it and start on it. We weren't able to get a true road diet, but we were able to get a side path that's going to be constructed, and DelDOT is working on that design right now and expects to have that side path from 6th Street to Delaware Avenue completed by 2026. Now, as a great connected project, there's going to be an extension of that side path all the way down to the riverfront. So it's going to go down to 4th Street and through the 2nd and 3rd Street areas. That's going to be a wonderful piece of project that's going to move forward in 2027. And so the greatest part of this is that things that people were asking for right off the bat are actually moving a lot faster than that cap's going to move, because that is a big lift. But that was a really wonderful thing to see from the Department of Transportation moving forward. It was very important to the previous Secretary of Transportation, and it's important to the current Secretary of Transportation. So it keeps moving. Next slide, please. So as you can see, the costs are very, very high for a project of this magnitude. We have a very wide canyon at the top. And so even the first phase is probably in a room of $100 million total. And subsequent phases could get even more expensive, because then you're working around the ramp system that's already out there. But the key was to kind of get an idea of the cost so we can continue to move forward. We are very encouraged that the Delaware Department of Transportation has pulled in another grant from the NAE grant, and that is going to continue work on this project. It'll get us started on NEPA, get us started in some engineering, and continue the public outreach, because that's really the key piece of this. This is a community that's not used to getting a lot of attention, and they're concerned about a project continuing to move forward. Next slide, please. So the conclusion of our study basically just pointed out that this is important to the community in so many ways. Seeing it move forward is a wonderful thing for them. And they felt like they got to guide the vision. We even had a signed letter from the advisory committee in the final report stating their support for this project and hoping that it could continue to move forward because they felt like it was done as well as they were expecting to get done. And I have to say, I don't usually get, applause at a public workshop when you're closing up your presentation. And this is one of the ones that we actually got that. So we felt really good about the community buying in and feeling ownership on this process. And so for us, this was a really big win, and we just look forward to seeing how it can continue. We know that we'll need to see grants to move this thing all the way through to completion. But again, it was very aggressive on DelDOT's part to immediately jump in and try to find another grant to keep things moving. And see those other projects moving forward that are going to benefit the community, whether this cap gets built or not. So that was another really key piece. And that's what I have for you today. Really appreciate the time and your attention.
Thanks, Dave. There's something about that aesthetic of like the kind of art that like architects and planners use. It's the best. I could look at that stuff all day. Dave, that was a great presentation. As a reminder, after our fourth presenter today, we'll have a time for Q&A. I know there's a lot of people in our online audience today, including lots of congressional staff. If you have a question, you can keep it anonymous, but if you have a question, you can follow us on social media at EESI Online. You can also send us an email, and the email address to use is that's ask@eesi.org. That brings us to our next panelist. Rob Mowat is the Zero Emissions Mobility Practice Lead at HDR Incorporated. His group supports policy, planning, design, and implementation of electrified mobility projects for corridors, transit freight, communities, highways and roads, rail, aviation, and maritime transportation. So kind of everything. In this role, Rob collaborates with federal, regional, and local public agencies, as well as energy providers and private industry, to ensure holistic integration of programs to support electric vehicle adoption. HDR supports and manages the implementation of the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program for 14 states. And Rob has always had a passion for cutting-edge technologies that offer community and environmental improvements. Rob, thank you so much for joining us today. I'll turn it over to you.
Great, appreciate that. Add to that perspective today and really kind of talk about electric vehicles, electric mobility in the U.S. And that also kind of give you maybe a few other ways of looking at EVs and their impact on the communities as we move forward to go through that. So as you can see on the next slide, really what you're going to see is that if you look backwards, the early start was the proof of concept, right? It had a perspective on it of being lots of new things, very environmentally focused, a very few products out there to choose from. About 2015 or so, it started to really change. You started to see some really high-end, more sporty vehicles and sedans out there. And so the consumer image changed quite a bit and really became kind of the high-end consumer. And then about 2020, you start seeing it's really changing moving forward. The emerging technology is a lot more consistent. And as you can see on the next slide, really what those big key factors are for folks. And so you're seeing a lot more on the next slide, you'll see more adoption moving forward through that. And really what you're seeing is that the market has really matured for those vehicles. You have a lot more vehicles, vehicle types, a lot more manufacturers out there. The reliability of the vehicles have gone way up. The battery costs, you can see there, have come way, way down on a cost per kilowatt and continue to drop year by year. You're seeing that the range of the vehicles has greatly increased, right? So they've gone from 45, 50 miles to well over 300 miles, and you're seeing charging times from 6 to 8 hours now and 45 minutes to an hour. So quite a bit of improvement, really making the vehicles much more usable by the everyday American as they move forward through their process to go through things. So if that's the case, where's really our adoption? So the next slide you'll see is to see the adoption in the US. And so we're about 2023, about 7 to 8, depending on this, how you looked at it, 7 or 8% of the new vehicles purchased in the United States were electric vehicles, not including plug-in electric hybrids or plug-in electric vehicles going forward through that. So that's 1.1 million vehicles. So it's quite a bit of vehicles in that space as you go forward through that. And I'd like to illustrate for you on this study, you're seeing the forecast in the pink area, and with government and regional assistance and or refunds or rebates or incentives, they can see if that continues to move forward, that they think that the trend for adoption will be on the high end of that pink section. But if those rebates and reductions fall out, you'll see that they expect it to actually slow down, continue to move forward, but still slow down a little bit, or if there's disincentives to owning these vehicles, it'll fall down as well. But still, it's moving forward as we go through that in the US. But just that's the vehicle side, and what's happening on the charger side. So the next slide really talks about where are we with the charger implementation going forward, because about 80% of charging takes place at home and the rest happens on the road or destination charging. And some people don't have homes to charge. So multifamily housing and other places, they have things going forward through that. And you'll see just in the beginning of last year, the new vehicles are outpacing public ports or public charging that's in there really. So you're seeing about a ratio of 48 vehicles for every public port. And to give that some context, the average globally is 10 vehicles per port. And that changes greatly based upon geographic density and some other things as you go forward through that. But if you look at it, say, for example, in Norway, there are 30 ports per vehicle. The UK is 16 vehicles per port, and China is 6 ports per vehicle. So there's a lot of variance in there as things move forward through that. But I think when you start thinking about the infrastructure moving forward, and NREL has really looked at it and said, okay, with the number of vehicles forecasted by 2030, we really need to install 438 public ports a day, or roughly 3 chargers every 10 minutes from now until 2030 to keep up with the pace. So there's a lot of infrastructure just to support existing pace of purchasing as they move forward. And so there's a lot of focus. People talk about the vehicle and the charger, but really there's more to it. And the next slide you'll see is there's really an ecosystem that is supporting the vehicles. It's actually much, much larger than just the vehicle and the charger. And so you're seeing that it's a great mixture of design, software, manufacturing, and service and support, actually holding up this new industry as it evolves and moves forward through this. And you'll also see there's some very interesting side companions or partners in this process. One of our rural states that we work with is a very large coal producer. And so they really became an EV advocate because their concept was we can produce more electricity and sell to a market we haven't had before. And so it's actually one of those things where you can find a lot of economy and a lot of moving forward through that. And that ecosystem is really driving globally this market. So it's not standing still waiting to see what we're going to do through that. So if you look at the next slide and just get a sense of context, a study was done recently looking at the top 18 global arenas of technology that are moving forward that really may shape the global economy by 2040 and how those move forward. And interestingly enough, there are 4 areas that we feel really converge in the EV space, and one of which is electric vehicles, obviously. Then you're getting into shared autonomous vehicles and that technology, battery development, and then future air mobility advanced air mobility is a big project as well. And it's interesting that 4 of those 18 or 22% are all kind of around this arena of investment that they globally having lots of impact on global market, GDP, and profitability of the private sector. So the concept is, the understanding is that the global market is moving. And the question for that is, do we move with it? And do we lead it or do we follow it? And so I'd like to just kind of show that in the history of the US, the next slide, we have a policy and a heritage of really supporting the investment in technology and keeping the US on the leading edge of new technology, moving that forward, whether that be in development of aviation or aviation policy, rail, interstate corridor development, roads, interconnecting all of our folks in different states and cities, transit systems, safety technology systems out there for folks, as well as just providing access to people, right? Curb cuts. 7, 8 years ago, everyone's like, oh, curb cuts? Okay. Now it's a huge thing, and you can't even imagine doing something without curb cuts these days, right? So providing access and opportunity for Americans is a really big piece of really investing in EVs as we move forward through that stuff. So when you're talking about investment, really there's more than just us. And so the next piece you'll see on that slide is there's a lot of U.S. investment going in on the federal side, on the state side, as we'd heard from previous presenters, and also private investment, right? In design, manufacturing, going forward. And really what you're seeing is that the public investment really sparks a much larger economy of driving a private investment. And so there's a lot happening in that. And you can look at all kinds of studies looking at, for every dollar that's invested on the public side, how many private dollars, anywhere from 10 cents to $1 to $5 or $6 per dollar. A lot is going on in that space. But I think it's important to see that it's not just one bucket of funding, but it's a lot going on. One of the current programs that's in place that I'm sure you're aware of on the next slide is the Infrastructure and Investment Jobs Act. And there's 2 big components to that. One of which is the Electric Vehicle Infrastructure, or NEVI program, which is a formula-based program for the U.S., which is really designed, in short, to build out a spine of chargers along corridors that allows people to move between cities, between states, right? Light duty equipment primarily, or medium duty equipment available, moving between connection. It's a connection point serving areas that don't have private investment yet because of size or capacity. So serving underserved communities just in population size, not necessarily economic, but also looking at rural settings as well moving forward. Another part of that is the Charging and Fueling Infrastructure, CFI, which is actually a discretionary grant program. And that program really is focused on providing charging along communities, right? So areas that do need support to help their citizens have a choice as they move forward to move through that. And I would say these programs are continuing to move forward. They're on the edge of implementation in many cases in many states. But really, there's a couple things to remember about this. Is they're highly regulated and have very limited flexibility. And so you'll see that the impacts of an urban setting versus a rural setting are much different, and having a one size fit all has provided a number of challenges going forward through that program. But really, one of the big things is it really exposed limitations of technology and the delivery mechanism with which we offer these services. And so one of those things I think that really we should think about in the future is freight. So when you see on the next slide, freight, the thing there is that it is a massive issue. It is a large complexity issue. It's a combination of public policy, investment, private investment, and energy coordination to provide all this stuff. You have much higher power and charging requirements. So from a 450 kilowatt to a megawatt or more per port, really big systems, big equipment. And when you think about a lot of our federal highway systems and freight planning, they're just trying to find places now to park vehicles, overnight them or whatever. So now when they're parking and charging, now you're connecting the parking and spacing with availability and grid impacts and all that coordination. It's a huge piece that's coming, and it's coming very quickly. And people will say, well, that's freight, it's not there yet. I'll tell you that the next page you'll see, next slide you'll see is Rocky Mountain Institute, RMI, came out and said, hey, when we looked at 12 years worth of data, 60% of medium duty vehicles and 43% of heavy duty trucking could be done today with today's technology. And technology is just getting better and more efficient every single day. And the key to this is that the return on investment for these kinds of operators that are putting high mileage, lots of usage, the return on investment financially returns pretty quickly, because they're looking at, yes, it's higher operating costs, but the savings in maintenance, the savings in energy costs can be significant. So they will be early adopters, and you're seeing a lot of these people doing it for a financial reason on top of a economic or corporate citizenship perspective for the environment. So the last couple slides I'd wrap up was really talking about infrastructure from a perspective of it provides choice. And so when you look at these kinds of things and you look at the people, the constituents we have, whether it's a person charging in their residence or charging in their community, destination charging, or whether it's freight, whether that be the local folks doing last mile delivery, whether they're charging behind a fence or in shared public settings or along corridors for freight or personal vehicles, all of those things, transit, maritime, rail, having dedicated charging, it provides choice. How is the best way to work and use these types of services and this mobility in the various communities that we have? So that when you have these great projects we just saw earlier, how do we tie these in so we can support them and move forward? So choice is a huge issue for that. And finally, on the last slide, just kind of talk about the value of investment, really why this makes sense to us. And I think one of the big drivers for there is, do we want to look at it and say, are we a producer and a leader, or are we just going to be a global consumer? And that is a really big perspective to look at. There is a large ecosystem that we can support and develop in the U.S. to lead this forward in the development of technology to do that. Also access the global markets. This is moving forward, and we want to sell our vehicles. Well, if all of our vehicles or manufacturing components here are in traditional fossil fuels, but the rest of the world is not buying those products or not involved in those products, we're not able to export those products to other folks. And they have some issues there to go through that. Infrastructure, we're putting in 40, 50-year infrastructure projects. We need to make sure that we're putting in the right infrastructure to talk about how much power is needed and the sizing and spacing and all of those kinds of things, so that we're not 10 years into it ripping things up and redoing and repaving to put in the next level of technology. And again, finally, it just provides choice for us as we move forward in the US with our overall thing. So with that, Daniel, I turn it back to you.
Thank you, Rob. That was a really great presentation. Really appreciate all of that. We have one final panelist, and we will absolutely, Chelsea will absolutely have her full amount of time. But that means we're going to be a minute over 1 o'clock Eastern. So sorry about that for those in our online audience. If folks in our online audience have to bail at 1 o'clock or a little bit before, we totally understand. But everything will be available online. Go back and rewatch the video. We'll also be doing summary notes and photos and all sorts of, and maybe not photos because this is an online briefing. That's for in-person briefings. But we absolutely want to make sure that we hear everything that Chelsea has to say, because she has a really great presentation. I've kind of already seen it. Chelsea Mitchell is a senior ecotoxicologist for King County in Washington State. She has been working in Washington for the last 7 years on issues related to aquatic toxicology and stormwater treatment using green stormwater infrastructure. While she was earning her PhD from Washington State University, her research focused on ways to prevent toxins and road runoff from impacting local environments, especially Chinook salmon. Chelsea, thank you so much for joining us today. Over to you.
All right. Thank you so much, Daniel. Yeah, so today I'm going to switch gears a little bit here at the end and talk about a problem that really does have some synergy with the other talks that we've heard today. And this is the issue of stormwater and how that impacts our waterways and how it relates to our reliance on highways and roads in the US. Next slide, please. So as we've heard and as we know, we rely on highways and roadways to get around. It was really encouraging to hear about, from the other speakers about investments in public transit and green spaces as kind of things they want to see in, new highway spending. And that really ties in well to this talk. So next slide, please. So we have over 3 trillion vehicle miles are driven on U.S. highways annually, just on U.S. highways, federal highways. And next slide. The trouble with this is that while we're driving on highways and we have rainfall, all of the pollution that comes from our vehicles actually gets transported by that rainfall into our local waterways. And we have some treatment mitigations that are in place to hold stormwater, prevent flooding, some ways that we do treatment across the US, and it differs based on region, but in general, stormwater is a major source of pollution, degrading water quality across the US, with really like a toxic cocktail of thousands of different chemicals. And actually in Washington State, in Western Washington, where I live in the Puget Sound region, stormwater is actually the #1 factor degrading water quality in the Puget Sound. Next slide. And, just some of the sources of contaminants in stormwater are your like brake wear, all of the different fluids, oils, gases that can drip out of your car. And then something that people have really been focusing in on as potentially the next frontier in vehicle emissions is tire wear. And tire wear is basically just what happens when your cars drive on the road and generate friction. Eventually you have to replace your tires because your tread gets too low. All of that rubber from your tires is getting released into the environment, and the primary way that gets transported is via stormwater into local waterways. And I'm really going to zoom in on tire wear and one specific chemical for this talk, because it really is represents this like emergency problem that we have kind of across the US right now. Next slide. So this chemical that comes from tire wear is called 6-ppd quinone, and it is a super toxic chemical that comes from a parent compound called 6-ppd. And not to get into chemistry, but 6-ppd is put into all tire formulations. And the point of it is to protect your tires from degrading too quickly. So it is important for safety and for just like the value you get from buying a tire. But the problem is when it reacts with ozone and light, it turns into this super toxic chemical. Next slide. And hold on the video just for 1 second. This chemical was discovered in Washington State about 4 years ago. And it was discovered as scientists, a lot of scientists that I work with were trying to figure out why we were seeing these major die-offs of salmon across the Puget Sound region in urban areas, particularly near roadways. And you can play the video now, please. This is a video of a coho salmon in a stormwater impacted stream after a rainfall event. You don't normally see fish try to like put their mouths out of the water and gape for air. You don't normally see them like lay on their side and not be able to swim upright. But those are the things that we see happen to fish in our Puget Sound streams after stormwater runoff happens. And this is all caused by that chemical 6-ppd quinone. And this fish is probably going to die about an hour after this starts happening. Next slide, please. Yeah, and so, this is an urgent situation for us now because we see in species and waterways where we see impacts from this chemical, it'll basically within just a few hours be able to kill off like nearly an entire spawning population of salmon in a stream. So it has really devastating impacts on the survival of these fish and our salmon recovery efforts, which, in Washington alone, we've spent billions and billions of dollars over the last decade just trying to recover salmon. And, those efforts are very hard fought. But this chemical is kind of like undermining all of that. And this is really a nationwide problem. Even if you don't have coho salmon in your watershed, you probably have another sensitive species, that can be killed by this chemical at concentrations that we measure in the environment. So like coastal cutthroat, brook trout, rainbow trout, steelhead, lake trout. This map in the blue and orange shows all of the native and non-native ranges of all the fish that are sensitive to this chemical. So you can see, like, really for much of the country, this is an issue. And again, we're just still learning about it, but now we have this like urgent need to treat this chemical in stormwater. Next slide. And luckily there are some pretty simple ways to treat it. And they are, you know, similar to ways that we have learned are useful for treating other chemicals like metals and hydrocarbons, other things we really don't want getting into our water supplies and impacting our natural resources, but which are really generated at high levels from stormwater runoff from roadways. A particular type of infrastructure that's really valuable for these types of problems is green stormwater infrastructure. And basically, green stormwater infrastructure is like a type of infrastructure that restores some of the natural water cycle back to the landscape. So instead of just having rainfall running or falling onto a road surface and running off and bringing all the pollutants with it, these types of systems basically allow water to infiltrate, control the flashiness of storms, control flooding, but also can remove pollutants. And a lot of these use just simple engineered soil mixes to actually do this treatment. So they're relatively low cost compared to some other types of infrastructure retrofits. Next slide, please. And in King County, we have been studying this problem a lot. I know we're a local government, but we support 2 million people across the region, and there are several major cities, including Seattle in our county. We've been working with the state and a bunch of other local jurisdictions to figure out what bioretention mixes are. Bioretention being those engineered soils that we can use to treat water. Trying to identify some that can really improve water quality on many different dimensions, from like nutrients and metals to hydrocarbons, and also 6-ppd quinone, this chemical I'm talking about. And we've seen in recent studies, both in the lab and in the field, that running stormwater, like you can see the really toxic stormwater on the left in that little pop out, you wouldn't even really want to touch that, it's so gross. That's water going into these systems, and then water coming out of these systems, you can see on the right, has been cleaned of many chemicals, and often you can remove almost all of the 6-ppd quinone from stormwater just by this simple treatment process. Next slide, please. And the fish really confirm this. If you expose coho salmon to stormwater without treatment, usually they will all die within a matter of a few hours. But if you filter water first through some kind of bioretention facility, all the fish survive. So it's the fish can really confirm for us that this is like a very simple but very effective tool for water treatment. Next slide. But large, beautiful green spaces, that's a really nice way to install green infrastructure, but it's not the only way. There are small, space efficient retrofits that also can improve road safety that have been shown to treat not only 6-ppd quinone, but some of the many other tire contaminants. So one example of that is porous asphalt overlay. It's a bit of porous pavement overlaid over impermeable pavement, and it basically is normally used to prevent hydroplaning, but it also, with those pore spaces, can trap a lot of contaminants and particles that come off of our cars and help us manage some of the issues of stormwater. And then another cool example of some low cost, very efficient retrofit technology is something we're doing in Washington, actually with federal funds through the National Estuary Program. It's called the Box of Rain, and basically on elevated roadways and bridges, they're basically figuring out ways to route water into these small little mini versions of a bioretention system with special soils in them that will actually remove this tire chemical as well as many of the other chemicals. And they're kind of creating a partnership program across the state with communities, local businesses, and local governments to sort of adopt a downspout and include maintain these types of treatment systems. Next slide. And really, all of this stuff that I've been talking about, it is very much federally supported. So we do a lot of work in Washington on stormwater because, like I said, it's really our #1 pollution problem, especially for Puget Sound. This isn't just true for Washington, though. Stormwater is a problem across the US. And we rely on funds both from, federal, like the infrastructure bill funds for stormwater retrofit projects. For example, the bottom right image there is a simple, like, sort of box type fire retention system that's being tested, funded by the infrastructure bill, and it's helping treat stormwater coming off going into the Skycomish River in Washington. That is like a very important, like, salmon habitat area for the Skycomish tribe. And then we're also receiving funds from the National Estuary Program. You wouldn't think that, you know, National Estuary Program would have that much to do with roads, but actually, like, a lot of our stormwater projects are funded by this program, and allow us to do things like map the areas across our region that are likely to generate the most 6-ppd quinone, and try to use that to target our funds efficiently for doing stormwater retrofits. And then all of these types of work that we generate, even locally, then kind of echo out to the country at large, because people look to Washington State as, like, a leader in these stormwater tools and technologies. So thanks so much for listening.
That was a great presentation, Chelsea. Thank you very much. We are a little over time, but I would like to kind of give everyone an opportunity to come back to sort of follow up on something that Chelsea was just talking about, and that is the idea that partnerships are very important to all of this, and then also there's an interplay between state and local priorities, federal funding, and how those two things go together. This is something we've talked about in some of our other briefings during this briefing series focused on surface transportation reauthorization. So very briefly, MJ, maybe we'll start with you, and then we'll hear from Dave and from Rob, and give Chelsea a chance to wrap up. But how much does state and local work interface with federal funding and programs when it comes to highways? And could you share an example of a partnership with the federal government and how that's advanced your work, in your case in Minnesota?
Sure. So as probably many, if not most of you know, highways, the way that our highways are funded, requires federal funding as well. So that's right off the bat. One way that our local projects interact or intersect with federal funding. As I was mentioning earlier, you know, the federal transportation funding, it provides highway funding flexibility so that states can redirect those highway funds to more sustainable multimodal projects, meaning biking, walking, rolling infrastructure. So that means that Minnesota could, you know, on the one hand, Minnesota could reduce investments in harmful highway projects, while on the other hand, simultaneously increasing available funding for those climate positive investments. Our Metro Transit, our regional transit system, they do receive a huge amount of federal funding. About 18.5% are from federal grants, including from the Congestion Mitigation Air Quality funds, and us as Move Minnesota, part of this, our C3 work that I was mentioning earlier is transportation management organization work. So that also receives CMAQ funding, and that's important for our local work on commuter education and assistance. So we connect riders to existing travel options, but also, yeah, supporting our region in mitigating congestion and reducing transportation pollution.
Thanks, MJ. Dave, over to you.
As the MPO for the Newcastle County area in Delaware, we work very closely with the Delaware Department of Transportation, their capital transportation improvement program, and our transportation improvement program have to be matched up. So we work very closely all the time to make sure that the funds are being spent, and we're all in agreement on how those things work together. I think one really great example of actually that kind of collaboration is there's a new highway interchange going on just south of where our office is. And as part of that very large project, there is a pathway that's being created to go over top of I-95 along the same route that's the interchange is involved with, SR 896. And so this is almost a standalone pathway to get folks from the Northern Trail Network to the Southern Trail Network. So that's one example of how those things work together, because we all talk as we go through these projects. I think MJ's point about the CMAQ is another important one. Our NPO actually has a prioritization process for NPO funds spent in Newcastle County. And so again, we collaborate with the Department of Transportation on all these things, even being asked to do the study that I just reported on. So I think you have to have those partnerships if you want to see successful projects and see change as you move forward.
Rob, and your presentation was mostly about the vehicles, electric vehicles in particular, driving over the roads. In your experience, what are some ways that what are some dynamics of the relationships between what the federal government is doing and how state and local governments are using that to advance their local goals around electric vehicles?
Yeah, so I think there's two elements, right? One of which is the funding side that helps doing with planning and coordinating, and then part of it's actually the implementation, putting infrastructure in place. So I think those federal dollars are being used in total or as a match to local funding and state efforts going through those programs on that process. I would say that we're seeing where it's really obvious we are seeing private investment leading the way and actually maybe eating up most of the funding or spending all their own money because they're seeing opportunities like the I-10 corridor flight from LA to Texas with the trucking network they're building out with private entities. There's no federal money in that, right? That's a full-blown thing. But you also have areas where it's needed, but they don't have the demands. The private hasn't showed up yet. And so you're seeing those states work with a lot of different groups, whether that be greenhouse gas, whether that be sustainability, whether that be just electrification efforts, using federal funding and local funding to build out those networks so that people can have access, so that all people have access to it, not just the predominant early adopters or the most financially viable at the time, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it definitely does. And Chelsea, at the end of your presentation, you were talking about partnerships and all of this. So give you an opportunity. This also probably be the last word on the panel. So if you want to ignore my question and just say something else, there's not much I can do about it.
Well, thanks for that invitation, but I will answer your question. Yeah, something that we receive a lot of, well, in my world where we do research and environmental management, we receive a lot of like pass-through funding from the federal government through our state and administered like by our Department of Ecology. So that in particular, like National Estuary Program funds are a really big deal for helping us with like water pollution research and also like stormwater retrofits, but also like the most recent infrastructure bill has supported a lot of stormwater retrofit projects or has started to support stormwater retrofit projects around our region. And really like the state and local governments cannot fund those types of big capital projects on their own. It takes that federal support to be able to put those things in place. And they really can have like multi-benefit uses if you're designing capital projects that like treat stormwater, provide green space, maybe also include investments in public transit. So
well, thank you very much for all of that. Tremendous presentations, MJ and Dave and Rob and Chelsea. Thank you so much for joining us. One of the reasons why this briefing was online is because we wanted to make sure that we had a great diversity of voices from across the country talking about this topic. 3 trillion vehicle miles? That means it goes through pretty much everywhere. And so every community, every state's being affected, and what Congress is going to be doing in the next couple of years is going to make a big difference for all of that. So thank you so much for being tremendous panelists. Sorry for going a little bit over, but it was well worth it in my opinion because I learned so much. We have done a number of briefings around transportation topics. So, today's been focused on highways. That's great. But we've also been looking at transit and rail. We've also been looking at the nexus of public health and transportation. And we also did a briefing at the end of our climate camp series a couple months ago that looked to the process specifically of how Congress typically reauthorizes surface transportation. So a lot of really, really great resources available online to check out, in addition to everything that we've talked about today. I'd like to also say thanks to my colleagues, Dan O, Amory, Allison, Hannah, Anna, and Nicole for all of their help today. We also have 3 great summer interns, Erin, Isabel, and Jasmine. thanks so much for all of the work you were about to do, putting together summary notes and helping with social media and all of that. So thanks so much. And of course, Troy, our videographer in the background. First briefing with Troy in a little while. He had a cool trip. So it's great to have you back, Troy. Thanks for being here. Our next briefing will be on Tuesday. It will be on Capitol Hill, and it's called Beating the Heat, a 2025 heat policy agenda. And we're organizing this briefing with our friends at the Federation of American Scientists. It's going to be a really tremendous briefing. Of course, you can watch it online. You can watch all of EESI briefings online. But if you show up in person, we're going to have ice cream sundaes, because what better way to beat the heat than a little ice cream? So MJ and Chelsea, it might be a little hard for you to make it to DC on Tuesday. But Dave, maybe you could hop on a train and come down. You'd be more than welcome. It's in the Rayburn building on Tuesday afternoon. Rob, I actually don't remember where you're located, but if you're close, you're welcome too. I'm not trying to leave you out. It's going to be a tremendous briefing, really, really great. We're still taking suggestions for toppings for those ice cream sundaes. So if you have any thoughts, you can use our survey, which we'll put up that link in just a moment to share. After next Tuesday's briefing, with all of the federal holidays coming up and with some recess weeks coming up, our next major event will be on Thursday, July 24th. Yeah, Thursday, July 24th, and that is the 2025 Congressional Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency Expo Policy Forum and Reception. Visit us online to RSVP for that. We will have 8 panels. We'll have dozens of exhibitors, hundreds of people coming through, and a reception at the end of the day, which will be really great. So you won't want to miss that. This is another link to our survey. If anyone in our online audience would like to take a few moments to share reactions to the briefing today, if you have additional ideas, like I said, suggestions for our toppings for ice cream sundaes, this is your opportunity to do that. We read every response, and it means a lot to us when people take a moment to do that. Thanks to everyone joining. Sorry we didn't get to all of the questions from the online audience today, but this was a really great session. I hope everyone has a great weekend, and to the extent that you have to drive home after work today, I hope it goes smoothly and you're not stuck in traffic all afternoon, because at least in DC, I think it's going to might be a little rainy a little bit later today. So thanks so much, everyone. Have a great weekend. We'll see you on Tuesday on the Hill for Beating the Heat, our extreme heat briefing. Thanks.